Suzanne, we're going to start with you. What does human progress even mean in the context of AI?
Wow, that's
Started
one
easy.
to start with. What does human progress mean?
Yes.
Well, I think we're entering into a time now where humanity and AI are kind of merging. So we're going to have to think about the progress of humanity and AI as being one thing rather than two things. I think AI is helping us every day. I'm very optimistic about the future of AI. I know we had the little poll area earlier that Gary initiated about whether you think AI is helpful or harmful. I'm always trying to think it's helpful because I think having a positive mindset is the way in which we actually make positive changes happen. So I'm always like, it always has to be helpful. I think we are going to end up merging with AI, using it more and more, and I think we just need to accept that and start thinking about ways in which we can make that future positive.
Wonderful. Did everybody here know that we were in the process of merging with AI? Are you signing up? It's the operations next week.
Every time you talk to ChatGPT, you are merging with AI.
Ooh, that's almost metaphysical. Mo, let's go to you. Will AI enhance human connection or reduce it?
It's it's a good question. I know there were some earlier sort of different perspectives on this, but I remember I was here last year at TED, and Greg Brockman, this is soon after ChatGPT launched, which was like end of 2022, right? So this was 6 months later, talking about how some of the early use cases they saw that sort of surprised them even at OpenAI were around people just wanting to talk to somebody. And perhaps here in this audience we don't experience this as much, but there's a lot of people out in the world that don't really have anybody to talk to. And so I know it doesn't necessarily correlate to human connection the way we think about it, at least human to human. But it is pretty incredible that you have something that out there now that sort of like passes a basic Turing test that people want to interact with, and I think that reduces human suffering in a lot of ways that I think we should think about in the context of people who don't have those human-to-human connections. Now, I think the the goal would still to be have something that could foster human connection over time, but something that reduces human suffering and allows people to feel like they're connected to something, I think is positive.
Handel, same question.
Crushing loneliness and isolation to the extent that maybe it drives us further into the arms of creating sort of these AGIs that we can have meaningful dialogues with. So to a certain extent, I think that it's endemic within sort of modern society, this concept of loneliness and this phenomenon. And it's right now being exacerbated by a lot of the technologies that we have, social media, mobile, et cetera. But maybe at some point, the pendulum swings so far that it becomes okay, and we go across this uncanny valley of human, or what we think is human interaction, and we're able to, develop proxies for that to fill the void, so to speak. And I think that's where I'm optimistic about human ingenuity.
Is that, okay, sorry. The wonderful thing is that the expert doesn't have a mic in her hands right now, and she's sitting over there. And we could just talk, and she can't even say anything. It's amazing. It's incredible. Suzanne, I do want to go to you on this, because one of the things I was thinking about when she was having her great and amazing chat is that as AI gets better, develops a long-term memory, and maybe even becomes conscious or has a conscience, which you're working on, maybe things will change.
I mean, I think so, yeah. I think with something like the large language models we're seeing now, we're getting to the point where it's passing the Turing test. We can't tell that we're really not talking to a person. But what we don't have yet is that AI in the physical world that's doing the same thing. I mean, I say this to everyone I meet. We don't have robots walking around amongst us yet. We talked a little bit about the Tesla demo the other day, but we just don't see that. We don't have that, and why is that? And I argue it's because we haven't yet developed that Turing test level of human-like imitation in these robotic systems. I think there are pieces missing, like Gary was saying. So it's worked for text. Large language models have got to that point where they are kind of mimicking people well enough that they are convincing us that they are human-like. But it's much harder to mimic it when you actually have a full system that has to interact with you socially. It has mannerisms, it has gestures, it has to navigate around in the physical world. We don't have that, and there are pieces missing. Personally, I think one of the missing pieces is consciousness, but I don't want to go into that too much yet. I think we'll get there with that aspect too.
Give us a flavor of what you're working on, if you would.
Okay, so the idea, let me try and summarize it. So currently the way all AI works is that it takes large amounts of training data. It trains the model, and then the model imitates the data that it's been trained on. So this has worked for text so far. We now have systems that seem really human-like because they're mimicking that text they've been trained on. With generative AI with images, they're mimicking millions, maybe billions of images that they've seen. But this is not how people work. We don't see millions and millions and billions of images and then use that to, say, generate something. We're using a totally different process. And I think there's a different process going on in our brain that's related to what we use consciousness for. And that's when we're in a situation that's completely novel. We've never seen it before. And we have to make decisions. We have to react with no training data. So the question is AI doing that yet? And I don't think it is. I think there's still research to be done to really understand how our living beings, not just humans, not just people, animals, and you could argue even plants, are kind of using this innate instinctive knowledge to solve problems in very complex environments that AI can't yet. So that's what I'm working on.
Super interesting, Handol. Let's go to you. Suzanne said earlier that we're merging with AI.
Well, I mean, I'm leave the consciousness discussion to you. In our little corner of the universe where we're just, we're focused on sort of humble goals like curing cancer with AI.
Is that a humble brag?
Well, I mean, we're talking about the nature of human consciousness and, all of these weighty issues about what it means to be human. And so within that context, I think that if we can help people live longer and not get sick, yay, right? So,
but we're all going to live in some computer matrix somewhere.
That's one way of doing it, right? And so, I mean, the way I look at it is there was a question earlier on, do we work on AGI or do we work in other sort of domains where we can apply AI? And I think that there's a lot of benefit to society. There are a lot of, things that can help the world and other humans and also make a lot of money in doing so by focusing on certain domains. And here's the thing. It's really, really fucking hard to do AGI. And Suze and I used to work at a quantum computing company. That was hard. The AGI is way harder. But the fact of the matter is that there are problems that if we can actually bring what we see as contemporary machine learning, and here's the thing, is within the AI bubble, and you go to NeurIPS, you go to ICML, or you go to iClear, CVP, and you're presenting papers, you're sitting around with other machine learning researchers. That's what they call themselves, machine learning researchers. They don't say AI because no one does AI, except some awesome people at Sanctuary and various other companies. But other than that, they're talking about machine learning, right? And you can apply this machine learning to all these different domains, but they aren't, because they're all focused on the things that are making a lot of money. And to Gary's point, you go to Anthropic and you're worth a lot of money, and you go to Mistral, or you go to any one of these companies that are working on these weighty sort of generative models, basically to do your email better, right? You can make a lot of money. Whereas, and you have a lot of data, and that's where all the money is. You got GPUs, you can train your models. Whereas, what about trying to solve for rare diseases? What about trying to figure out new materials that'll save the planet? What about certain more pedestrian things that are really hard, right? And how I define deep tech, and I'm sure frontier tech, is really where the risk of actual failure is bounded by science, right? And the rules of physics or chemistry. Like, you have a real probability of not being successful, and it's not necessarily business failure. And if you could solve this problem, then the business kind of follows because it's so awesome, right? That's how I kind of crudely define frontier tech. And I think that, the intersection of AI in the physical world to move from, bits and bytes to atoms and molecules, that's the real opportunity to really make an impact on what we consider to be the real world. And whether it's in health or whether it's in life sciences or whether it's in materials or climate change or anything to do, or robotics or embodied intelligence, anything to make this world a lot better would be super awesome, in my opinion, rather than maybe trying to optimize for, the AI world. But then that's just how I think.
Mo, we're going to go to you a second. We're going to talk about work because that's a big part of the human experience. Suzanne, I want to come back to what you said, where you said we're merging with AI. Talk about that a little bit first, because it's more related to where we've been before we go to work, and what you mean by that, maybe with a small m and maybe with a capital M.
Merging with a small m and then a capital M? Yeah. So I'd say merging with a small m, we're already there. It's just, if you think about the number of tools you use every day that rely on AI, maybe not even kind of aware of that, but things like search, like internet search, like email search, things like that, they're all trained on AI. So I think we're already using these tools every single day, everything we do. If you think like, well, if the internet went away, like what would we do? The whole economy would collapse. That's, I think, what we mean by the little m merging. The big M merging is when I think it starts to interface directly with our own brains. So this sounds kind of science fiction-y when you talk about it, but I really don't think it's a long way away. I think there's going to be a kind of steep curve here where we start seeing these brain-computer interface devices. Currently they're very crude, but there are ones you can buy on the market now that you can kind of control your computer mouse with your brainwaves, and then companies like Neuralink are looking into more invasive techniques with surgery. I think we're going to get there. I don't think it's going to be very long, and whether people adopt that as quickly, I don't think so, because I don't think people want stuff drilled into their skull like immediately. But if it works and it gives those people a huge advantage, I don't think we'll see that as weird in about a decade's time.
I was just going to ask, how long is not very long? I guess that's a decade?
I mean, I guess everyone says a decade when they're not sure, right?
10 years away, right? Kind of safe. I can go to the next conference. Nobody will call me out. No. Excellent. Mo, let's turn to you. You put some notes into our doc about work. Work is kind of near and dear to a lot of us, whether we love it or we hate it. It's kind of how we feed ourselves. And there's a lot of AI that is coming out right now that maybe it's not AGI, maybe it's wrong a lot of the time, but it's also right a lot of the time, and there's a lot of chance and opportunity for it to do a lot of what some people do to feed their families. Talk about that future.
There's a lot of conversation around like AI replacing, jobs and the sort of the fear that comes from that, but I almost take like an optimistic spin, and I guess I have to because I'm a venture capitalist, so we always have to, think about things from a positive direction in some ways. But the progress, that we've seen so far, I would say I agree with Gary and some of the other folks that we're not quite yet at AGI. I do think that's some ways away, but that's not to say AI can't provide a ton of value today, and that is what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of entrepreneurs like start new companies that are replacing some of the like menial tasks and drudgery that people had to do, and it's everything from like people that were doing like marketing copyright to sort of administrative tasks in healthcare, and so it's enabled humans to be a lot more creative and do what like we excel at as humans. Now I've always sort of thought about like the man-machine fusion aspect of AI, making us better and better at what we do, allowing us to be more creative. And it's not limited to just generative AI either. I mean, we've got companies that help doctors better diagnose patients. And do you call that computer-aided detection or diagnosis, or do you call it AI? At the end of the day, it's almost like a product marketing sort of adventure. But I think it creates a ton of value, and we're already starting to see that now. And so, I actually think, like, from an end state perspective, there's so much more automation that's on the come, and I think about it in the context of that allows humans to go do more meaningful work, right? Like, the end state that I'm very excited about is, like, at some point, we're not gonna have to work for money. We're gonna find ways to, do work that brings us joy and meaning in our lives, and that's the end state I want to get to.
Cool. So we're going to live in Star Trek. Awesome.
Exactly.
Maybe not the U.S. I don't know. Maybe Northern Europe will. I don't know. Maybe some other countries. We'll see how it goes. Super interesting. I want to go a little deeper with that, Mo, because if we look at healthcare, which is one of the areas that you brought up, south of the border, it's a hellscape of if you don't have any money, you don't have any healthcare. North of the border, it's turning into a bit of a hellscape of everybody gets the same crappy care. And I kind of feel like AI has a role to play here.
Yeah, I mean, look, the U.S. healthcare. I live in the U.S. and we've got all
sorry.
kinds of. Yeah, exactly. Like with respect to healthcare, we've got all kinds of like misaligned incentives and things that we have to work through. But the promise of AI, which I think is fascinating, in terms of like an end state, could be how do we get free healthcare for everyone forever, right? And that would be like the end goal. We're obviously not there yet. There's a lot of different factors involved, especially in the U.S. healthcare systems with payers, providers, and misaligned incentives. But you can already, we're already starting to see value come out from entrepreneurs that are building companies that will help automate diagnosis, and that's making it cheaper and easier. Like you think about a lot of us have access to incredible healthcare, whether you're here in Canada or in the U.S., just because we can afford to get access to it. But if you think of people in rural communities or people in, I'm originally from Bangladesh, like places like that where people don't have access to that care. If you think about hey, even a doctor that's just starting out or a doctor that's not at that level of expertise can marry with an AI system and be able to do things that they otherwise couldn't do. That's amazing and that's phenomenal. And that access of care can be much more widespread than it is today. So those are the things that make me optimistic, because I think it can improve what humans can do and provide wider access to people that otherwise can't get that level today.
And probably globally, we need 100x better access to healthcare or something along those lines. And there's no way we can do that instantly with people. Okay, cool. I just got the call sign that we have like 5 minutes left. Are there any questions from the floor? Run to you with a mic because I've not heard any of the questions so far. So if you can be brief, please, sir.
Yeah, this is going to be a terribly formed question, so apologies for that. But, we keep talking about AGI as, this total reflection of we're going to recognize this as some super form of human intelligence, as opposed to some alien intelligence that we have no frickin' idea about because machines are talking to machines coming up with new language. What's the probability that AGI will happen and we'll have no frickin' idea that it happened?
Suzanne, you first.
I guess I have a very specific take on this, which is I think the kind of intelligence that develops is very based on the training data and then also based on the kind of body it has. So I've always sort of said through my whole career, if you want something that's human-like in intelligence, it needs a human-like body. It needs to understand the world in the same way people do. So if you think about it, say a human-like robot that has very similar senses and ability to move and react to the world like a person does, the training data to train that the data looks very human-like. It looks like the same kind of data we're getting from our senses. So I've always advocated for that. Not because I want robots to replace people, but I think if we build AI that's human-like, we're going to understand it better because it's going to be like us. And I actually think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. The kind of AI I'm scared of is really alien intelligence where we don't even understand what it's thinking, how it's computing, how it's created that kind of output. I'm more worried about that than about kind of like human-like robots.
Super good question. Awesome. Okay, we're just about to wrap. I'll add one comment and then I'll ask them to have like a closing comment of like 45 seconds, 60 seconds. It was pretty interesting. I don't even know who said it. Maybe one of you guys will know. Somebody recently recounted a story and somebody was talking to them. There was an AI expert. Somebody was saying to them, how can I get an AI that will take care of my kids so I can do my job? And the person said, not in these words, you're a bloody idiot. You want it the other way around. And that's really interesting. We think about redefining human progress and connectivity. Okay, cool. Starting from that end and coming back down to Suzanne, 45, 60 seconds, closing thoughts on redefining human progress and connectivity in the AI revolution.
I don't really have much to add in terms of redefining I mean, I think to your point, we really don't know what's going to happen. And we as humans don't understand this concept of exponential improvement or growth. I mean, it's really beyond our capability to understand. And all of the assumptions that we have upon which we're basing enterprise, society, politics, economy, I mean, all of these things are subject to redefinition. I mean, Mo mentioned the concept of, universal basic income. I think it's an inevitability. I think we have to be dislocated from work, to your point as well, right? And maybe that'll help self-actualize the human race, and like we can, instead of like toiling away at the job that you hate and then meeting
Heaven
your
on
buddies.
earth.
Yeah. Maybe we can become better versions of ourselves. And maybe that's one of the things that, the very first thing that AI can help us do.
Wonderful. Techno-optimism. Mo, your turn.
A similar perspective, I'm very interested in companies and technologies that are going to push humanity forward in a positive direction. I think of AI as sort of, I think someone earlier had this sort of, similar sentiment. AI is an enabling technology, right? It's not. I don't think it's inherently good or evil. I think it's largely how we use it. I do think there are still fundamental areas of research where we have to figure out, how does this extend and generalize much more than it does today? But I actually think there's a ton of companies that are creating products that are providing value to humans, and I'm optimistic about that. I think that's going to continue on.
Suzanne.
I think we absolutely have to understand consciousness and what it is. So people tend to fall into one of two camps. They say, oh, AI will never be conscious. In that case, what we're building is increasingly intelligent, more and more powerful tools that then can be used by others. So others control them, others decide the morality and the goals of those systems. So you can ask if that's what you want. The other option is you think AI will just become conscious. Suddenly, emergently, in a way that we don't understand. And that's even more scary, maybe, because then we won't know what's going on. We won't know what kind of consciousness it has. And I think for us, consciousness is everything we are. Like, it's everything we experience. It's how we relate to each other. It's everything we feel. So I think we just need more research into it. We need to be able to understand it so then we can carefully put it in if and when we choose to in AI.
And here I'm operating in zombie mode 90% of the time. Excellent. Thank you so much.
can
Please
help
thank
you
the
too.
panelists.